I wanted to talk about a story. That one, what we've heard has been a bit underreported, several of those. This is one that I think has been massively underreported. And that is a new defense agreement that was signed on October 23rd between the British and German defense secretaries. This agreement now means you will have German planes flying from British bases. You will have the British Army and the German Army working together more closely than ever before. You will have German defense companies playing a much bigger role in Britain's defense manufacturing. The agreement that they signed, it's called the Trinity House Agreement. They signed it at the headquarters for Britain's Lighthouse Service, or England and Wales's Lighthouse Service, because this is meant to be a beacon of how Britain wants to conduct its military policy in the future. Our UK government press release says it marks a fundamental shift in the UK's relations with Germany and for European security. I like the way Politico put it. They took a little more poetic license. They said the British military of the future is going to have a strong German accent. So the British and German armies will train together to fight in Eastern Europe and in the Baltic. At sea, they're going to work together to protect electric and internet cables. Under the North Sea, German P-87 Poseidon reconnaissance planes will patrol the North Atlantic from Scottish bases. So that's the German planes using British bases that I mentioned. Our two countries were going to work on new long-range strike missiles that can fly further and strike more precisely. These are missiles that will be launched by planes and by ships. We're going to develop new drones for use on land, more unmanned ground vehicles for driving on land, ocean-going drones or drones used to be launched from ships. We're going to help Germany upgrade its helicopters with new missile technology, and then those helicopters will be passed on to Ukraine. Rheinmetall, this German defense giant that's really been increasing in strength and power over the last couple of years. They'll be opening a new factory in the UK, making artillery gun barrels. The German military startup Helsing. This is an AI military startup. I think that's a fascinating... You see startups in AI all over Silicon Valley, but this one is focused solely on the military. It's from Germany. They promised to spend almost $500 million to develop artificial intelligence systems in the UK. And then Britain and Germany, we're going to work with others to connect our air defense systems to detect long-range missiles. And then Germany's committed to continue to manufacture its Boxer armored personnel carrier in the UK. And all of this relationship will be overseen by a new level of committees designed to manage and improve the Anglo-German relations. I think something else that shows how big of a priority this was for the British government is that Germany was the first destination for Sir Keir Starmer to travel when he became Prime Minister. And that was when this Trinity House agreement really got started, when it made that trip. It's called a Trinity House agreement. It completes a trinity of bilateral deals. So Britain and France have an agreement called the Lancaster House Agreements. Germany and France have an agreement called the Aachen Treaty. Now with this Trinity House Agreement, it kind of completes this triple entente between these three, where all have bilateral deals. It effectively creates a new alliance that's being called the European Three, or the E3. And this is Britain and Germany. We're NATO allies. We fought alongside each other in conflicts like Afghanistan or in the Balkans. But these two have never had this kind of defense cooperation agreement. So it's a big deal, and it's entirely uncontroversial. It was barely covered at all in the British media. The only piece of criticism I saw of this deal came from a Conservative MP complaining that the Labour Party were taking credit for negotiations that he did, and that actually part of this deal he got started and it didn't have anything to do with what Labour did. Nobody cares, really, in Britain. Britain trusts Germany so much that this increased military cooperation barely makes the news. I mean, just in 2016, fears of the creation of a European army or some kind of European defence union, they played into Britain voting for Brexit. But just 8 years later, I mean, we're being sucked back into something that would be at the heart and core of a European military. And we don't really seem bothered about it.
I think it's interesting when you look at, say, some of the perspectives and predictions the predecessor, or the editor-in-chief of our predecessor, Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong in The Plain Truth, when he was alive and going through Europe right after World War II, and Germany lay in rubble, and Britain was one of the victorious allies, was one of the governing powers with troops on the ground in Germany, when decades later West Berlin still had a British sector. He was saying that Germany was going to rise from the ashes and dominate Europe again. It's that when he made those predictions, it's still within living memory. And now you have German Air Force at this point stationed in Britain. Before, not that long ago, even like with West Berlin, it was a few decades ago, you had Britain stationed in Germany, and now you have Germany stationed in Britain. And as you said, it's uncontroversial, even though, never mind people worrying about circumstances at a vote, like even though within living memory the two countries were at war with each other. I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. It shows so much about German resurgence. I just looked it up. Britain's last military base was handed back to Germany in 2020. So it was just 4 years ago, though I think there's still a British military presence at some NATO bases within Germany. But I mean, that's part of the reason why Sir Keir Starmer went to Germany right away. He wanted to rebuild relations with Europe. He knew that to do that, you go to Berlin. And when I saw this story, it reminded me of an article Mr. Flurry, trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Flurry, wrote in 1999 called Alamogordo, A Mistake You Only Make Once. Because this was about when the US allowed Germany to establish the first permanent foreign military base in America. This was at the Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, which they've now pulled out of. But you still had Germany, the US chief of staff of its European forces was a German military officer. You have this same level of put planes on our bases, trust from America. And he was making the same point that, well, this is entirely uncontroversial. And in that article, he had a quote from Winston Churchill's book, World Crisis. It was the first time I'd read this quote, and it really, really hit me or stood out to me. I thought it was just very profound, where he's talking about the world in the lead up to World War I. And he's talking about all the people in the run up to World War I who said, we won't have another war. We won't have a surprise strike. Nothing like this is going to happen. And the reasonings they gave are the same reasons people give today. He said, no, it is nothing. No one would do such things. Civilization has climbed above such perils. The interdependence of nations and trade and traffic, the sense of public law, the Hague Convention, liberal principles, the Labour Party, high finance, Christian charity, common sense have rendered such nightmares impossible. And Churchill writes, are you sure? It would be a pity to be wrong. Such a mistake could only be made once for all. And we have the same mentality today. I think many believe we've climbed above such perils of all-out war. I think perhaps many more believe, okay, yeah, we could have war. We're not beyond war. But such a war would come from like a rogue state like Iran, or it would come from someone who's very kind of obviously bent on conquest, like Vladimir Putin and his vision to rebuild the Soviet Union, or a rising rival superpower to the United States like China. That's where war might come from. But that for a country to be a friend and ally and then turn on us, to turn on Britain or to turn on America, well, no, that is not. No one would do such things. That is regarded as unthinkable. And history warns us not to be so dismissive. Other nations in the past have been caught napping. Like, that happens in history. And Mr. Flurry's article, Alamogordo, A Mistake You Only Make Once, and he goes through several examples of Germany doing exactly that, making these kind of surprise moves. And I think you see this, I think it's interesting to see this not just in context of that British news, but a lot of the news that you had while we were off air. I think one of the other ones is you had Germany inaugurating a new multinational naval headquarters in Rostock. I mean, this is from what I've seen, nobody really asked Germany to do this. They've been building this new naval headquarters. You've had some people in Eastern Europe and news out of Poland and things kind of saying we're not really that keen on having Germany run the Baltic Navy. They want to and run NATO's navy but they're just kind of doing it. They're building the headquarters. They're taking over leadership of NATO's Baltic Navy. And so this headquarters is going to be a new command task force Baltic headquarters. A German admiral is going to run it. There'll be staff from 11 other NATO countries. I mean, they're taking on more of these roles, commanding other people's militaries and stationing their soldiers. They're building their first permanent military base in Lithuania. And nobody's really worried outside of some of those, say some few in Eastern Europe and Poland. But the Bible gives us even more specific warnings. In Ezekiel 23:22, God tells Britain and America, I will raise up your lovers against you. You know, those people, those nations that you think really love you and will fight to defend you, I'm raising them up against you. Hosea chapter 5 and verse 13 is a warning that I think, and it's probably going to connect to what you, Mihaila, are about to talk about with the Middle East, because this talks about, Hosea 5 talks about both Ephraim, that's Britain in modern day Bible prophecy, but then also Judah, the Jews in the Middle East. And he says there, it says there, when Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, then went Ephraim to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb. This refers to Britain and then also Judah in the Middle East. Both turn to Assyria. They turn to modern day Germany for help with their critical problems. And as that passage goes on to describe, and other parts of Hosea describe, they're betrayed. They think they're getting help, and Germany turns against them. I mean, you can watch for that to happen as Israel tries to grapple with this issue of, well, what do we do long run in Lebanon and in Gaza? And we see Britain doing the same thing at the same time. And our free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, that is your guide, your essential guide to Bible prophecy and what God is doing in the world. And I've just been going over just yesterday the first chapter of that. And it really struck me just the way Mr. Armstrong sets this whole book up in the big picture of understanding the problems of the world. Why world events are the way they are. Why our nations have the problems the way they do. Why we can't solve issues of war and peace. And if there's a loving God overseeing all of that, what is he doing about a world that can't solve war and peace? And that can't understand cause and effect, and that isn't able to solve its problems? Well, that book tells you. And that book is about not God's love for Britain and the United States, but God's love for the whole world. And really, that book is about some more direct punishment that is coming upon Britain and America and on Judah and the Middle East, because those nations have had a history and an opportunity to know God and his law that other nations haven't. But it's about what God is doing for the entire planet and how he is working with the entire planet, and how it's going to lead to the entire planet having an invitation to come into God's family. So that's that book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. All of the material we'll leave in the show notes. You can go to our website, thetrumpet.com, and you can read it online, or even better, you can get your own free print copy so you can study it alongside your Bible and look at it there. Well, I'd wanted to quickly cover a few other important stories from Europe. We've seen quite a few stories about Europe getting more involved in the Middle East. And again, I think this is going to overlap with what we'll talk about with Mihailo shortly. So it's not just Germany making friends and signing deals with Britain. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, he visited Turkey on October 19th. He visited the Turkish President, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And he talked about how they needed to cooperate much more closely. He approved millions worth of arms exports to Turkey. Watch for them to do that as they move into the Middle East. France was being very involved, was trying to get more involved with Lebanon. They recently held a big fundraising event where they invited a whole lot of nations into Paris and tried to raise funds for Lebanon. Lebanon, of course, used to be a French colony. Watch for them to really push themselves to be more involved with what the day after looks like for Lebanon. And then Germany has been talking about that as well. Germany is a contributor to the naval part of the United Nations interim force in Lebanon. So that's an important story to watch. Iran is giving Germany another reason to get involved in the Middle East and to confront Iran. So Iran executed a German citizen on Monday. That really got the attention of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He called this German citizen's execution a scandal. He was a dual German-Iranian citizen that was basically kidnapped from the United Arab Emirates. The German Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, she promised serious consequences. I don't know whether they'll materialize. Maybe it will just be a strongly worded letter. But you certainly see Iran is not afraid to keep pushing at Europe and pushing at Germany, and eventually they will respond. And then Britain, we just saw our biggest ever tax rise yesterday. The Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, and his Chancellor, they just put up taxes, the largest amount ever, at least when it comes to monetary amounts. They've worked, it's pretty cowardly. They're working to hide it as much as possible. So the biggest increase was on the increase that the taxes that businesses pay based on an employee's salary. So it's called the employer's contribution. They have to pay a tax. As an employee, I don't even see that on my paycheck. It's not there as part of the tax that I pay to the government. So it's still a payroll tax that businesses pay. So in doing that, I don't immediately lose money out of my paycheck, but I do become more expensive to hire for my employer. So what that means across the country is going to be less pay rises, maybe pay cuts, more cost for businesses that could be passed on to consumers in the form of inflation and higher prices. The government's admitted, yes, this is going to suppress pay for private sector workers. Meanwhile, the government is handing out record pay rises to public sector workers as they hold the nation hostage with strikes. So we're seeing a big transfer of wealth from the private sector to the public sector, and a public sector that, despite the invention of things like the internet, has not increased in efficiency and productivity barely at all since the 90s. Something that's phenomenally inefficient. So this is more decline for the nation, more wasted economic resources. And then a massive story from Britain that we talked about on Wednesday's show was that UK government was found lying about the Southport attacks. So this is where a terrorist went and stabbed 3 little girls around 6, 7, and 9 at a dance workshop, horrified the nation. People were being jailed for saying that this was a Muslim terrorist attack. And then the government comes out now, a month later, charging the person that did it with terrorism offenses and announcing that they knew all along that he had an Al-Qaeda training manual. Shocking level of injustice, shocking level of censorship, of lying. It shows our government is corrupt. I talk about that on Wednesday's show as well. We're getting punishments. Our nations are being cursed. Some of that involves its leadership. But again, the United States and Britain in Prophecy explains why, and it explains the hope for Britain, for America, and for the whole world.